folks, I often wonder where to start, and I think I'll just start with this picture here. Generally speaking, what would I say where I start? Because a number of you guys know me from many years gone by, so I'll be very brief in terms of history. If you can imagine, back in the 70s, I started my world off with a team of horses, starting a 10-acre market garden. And shortly thereafter, I realized, after being raised by a bunch of people who were engineers and principals and teachers and nurses, they didn't really want me going into ag in the first place. And there I was with a team of horses. I realized it was time to go to school. Long story short, first experience with working with nutrition and things like that was when I was developing integrated pest management in the apple industry, becoming an apple grower in those days. Spent the next several years developing IPM in Ontario alongside with OMAFRA, which they call Ontario Agricultural Food and Rural Affairs. Then I ended up at the doorstep of United Agri-Products from some consulting work I'd done in the early 90s. Worked with them extensively in developing their Nortrace product line. And by then, in my consulting business, I've already been exposed to the seaweed extract industry from Acadia in Eastern Canada. And that would really be my initial days of being exposed to what we refer to at that time as a biostimulant. Then that progressed into moving out west with the United Agri-Products as an opportunity of a job transfer, really looking for the opportunity to expand my horizons in terms of the influence of the number of acres. I'd had extreme success working with nutrition in terms of causing some yield gains and creating disease pressure pushback. I'll be the first one to tell you that pushing back against disease until the onslaught of the biologicals and biostimulants, the nutrition world, I could push back against disease, but nothing like I could do against pushing back against insects. So anyway, long story short, here I stand today in front of you. Anyway, we'll move on, moving right along. So basically what I've made a passion of over the last 20 years, I mean, one of my favorite pastimes is sitting down in the campsite, drinking coffee, maybe go fishing, but reading research papers, printed papers that you guys would be just thinking, if you had your doctorate, you would just think I was crazy, which you probably are right. I am somewhat odd that way. But it's amazing the information you can glean when you learn how to read these great big words in research papers, because when you speak with a scientist, they break it down, much like John had said earlier, into segments. You have to isolate one thing from the other thing. And in the agricultural production world, we know that it's a blend of everything. So not only when you listen to somebody John talk about functions of things, it's a multitude of functions in the agricultural production world, but the science world always isolates them. But when you read those papers, what I'm getting to is you start to identify the differentiation of how you singulate them, how do you test for them, and then it's our job in the ag industry, producers included, to bring them all back together. So basically, that's what I've spent a great deal of time doing. This slide is up there not to perplex you to try and read the small print, but over the last number of years, I've traveled to different areas of the world, going to what they call the World Congress on Biologicals and Biological Stimulants. The last one was held just in Barcelona, Spain. And it's, again, to take you a little bit of a step back and away from the phrase of saying we're talking more and more about these snake oils. What you see up there is an introduction on the left of several lectures, and then a breakdown of what those lectures, that one particular lecture, is going to be about. Now, this is perplexing to me because, one, I was one of 10 Canadians out of 1,600 world delegates that were there. And if I just spent 50 grand or $75,000 on one of those presentations, because that's the money it takes to do this level of research. So if I'm sitting at a function where there's 55 of these presentations, do the math in your head. There's no way you're going to spend that kind of money and hold a Congress that's going to cost me $4 grand to go to if I'm going to sit there for 3 days and listen to a bunch of snake oil presentations. It don't make no sense, right? So when people say, oh, you're just talk about another snake oil, not only does the hair go up my back, but I lose it off the top. So you can see I've been frustrated for a long time. But it gives you an appreciation of the money being spent around the world. Now, this always brings me back to the point of it's all about the money, okay? Don't kid yourself. We're here to develop incomes for farm production, incomes for dealer reps, income for manufacturers. But the key is to bring about a sustainable operation, create this regenerative process of our soils so we all make money, okay? So then as this whole system unfolds, in the European Union, They started off by developing what an industry called the European Biological Industry Council, okay? And they've tried to be more definitive as to what it means to be a biological or a biological stimulant. A lot of people glaze their eyes over. Yeah, I can see the odd one. Open your eyes, guys. Toonies. Okay, so I'm not trying to overwhelm you here, but just to give you an idea, when I was there, again, remember, I'm only one of maybe 10 Canadians out of 1,600 world delegates. You know, we're all proud of being production opportunists here in Western Canada. We think we're well ahead of the rest of the world, guys. How can we be ahead of the world when you got me, for one thing, there as one of your 10 Canadians, and all the head scientists from around the globe are there to the tune of 1,600? There wasn't one member there from the government, and there was only a handful of people there representing the industry, and then there was me. So let's keep that in perspective, okay? So as we go along, I've got a couple of slides where they break it down into different zones and how are we going to test these biologicals and biological stimulants. All the while I'm realizing that Canada's asleep at the wheel. Are we going to be riding somebody's coattails again? But lo and behold, guess what? Maybe we are, because there's the giants. They're all in bed together. They're all creating a definition in an industry to sort of create these labelings. I can't blame you for thinking about snake oils, because when somebody drives into your farmyard, they pull out this beautiful brochure. They talk about what this product will do. And then the next thing you know, if you've listened to me at all, the first question out of your mouth is going to be, show me the data. Be it university research work or be it replicated ROI work that I really focus on. How do I create a definition so that I get away from the word snake oil? I'm talking about all this money being spent in the industry. Well, after I got back from my last World Congress of Biologicals, I was doing a couple of presentations. Word got out to some of my cohorts, and I'm pissing and moaning about the fact there's no Canadians there, blah, 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 blah. I get another phone call from another guy who's heard about my complaining, and I don't mean to be rude, but it's a perfect expression that we have here in Canada. He basically said to me in a very pleasant way, Scotty, shit or get off the pot. If you're going to complain and you're not going to do anything about it, be quiet. So guess what? I got invited to go to Ottawa. So I've just sat there, and as many of you guys on the board here and you guys in the crowd know, I'm not one to sit on my hands all day. Now I'm sitting there where they're trying to develop, read it there, Fertilizers and Supplements Advisory Committee. If you take a moment to read that as I speak about what's going on, I find myself in the room. We got the CFIA there. We got Fertilizer Canada. I'm there because we have never taken the time to structure label registration properly. They're trying to develop this committee to be able to speak directly and counsel the CFIA and the possibilities of registering these products that are biological stimulants. In Canada, we're going to refer to them as supplements. Due to the fact that I can't sit on my hands and keep my mouth shut, I'm part of the board of directors. Now I've taken on a bit more than I can chew, but by golly, I do like hanging out with you sciencey guys, John. It's a lot of fun. Now they're kind of glad because I don't sit on my hands because we have to be vocal. But where I'm going with this advisory thing, okay, we're going to try and create an avenue, an opportunity for those that are looking for more expedience of getting a label done, looking for ways of putting claims on the labels, so that in the production world, you'll now have a label with clear-cut claims. Now, as a committee, what we've done is we're trying to put together some other things where you create what we call working groups. So right off the bat, right now, what we've established, remember, January 16th is when we first got started, not-for-profit organization to offer advice and opportunity of information to CFIA. I've already getting pressure to talk to Health Canada. Oh, my God, open up a can of worms. But that being said, the whole idea is to get away from the aspect of snake oils and create actual labels. And as a farm producer, as a retailer, as a manufacturer, you're looking for things to streamline that opportunity. Mark my words, we're already on it. We've already developed our first working group, which means it's a community group of members of people that are part of this fertilizer committee. Fertilizer and Supplements Advice. I'm just going to call it FSAC, okay? Can I just say FSAC? Because that's the acronyms, right? So what we've done, we started a working group for dual property product registration, which means if you're a biological right now, you go under the Fertilizer Act and you get what I would call a label with no definitive measures of saying and claiming exactly what you're doing. So as a producer, a research or a retailer, you got a label that's isn't worth the paper it's written on. But as we go forward with this working group, we're trying to surmise it and within a year be able to put together a documentation. Then I'll take the CFIA, I'll do a presentation, and all it'll be will be advisory committee is to take that information to try and streamline and create these labels that we so much desire, because it will help everybody involved in the industry. Okay, moving right along. So here's a definition of biostimulants. We're using the word supplements because the European Industry Council is already running into issues because biostimulants and biologicals are way too vast, too big a scope. Even the Americans have used the word biologicals already in their new committees, and they're running into issues. So in an effort to avoid that, that's why it's being referred to as fertilizers and supplements, because it doesn't pigeonhole anybody into any position. So I'll leave this section alone. If you have any questions or interest, please let me know. So here's the first slide as I move into my data points so that you understand how imperative it is to have data. And now this is focused on what we're doing with the Advanced Ags ACF-SR. You can see there's a list of materials I've spent over the last 12 years and in replicated work. I guess it's now going into year 9, where I've studied and researched, and I'm looking for return on investment. I want to drive data that different products can be brought together to show the ROI. It's all about the money. Let's not kid ourselves. Because in Europe, their first years of studying and everything was to show how we could reduce biotic stress, abiotic stress. In Western Canada, we go weeks and weeks and weeks without rain. We have wind events. We have all these stress factors that go into our crops. And it's all about the money. So if I'm going to spend $10 today, and then in 2 weeks, eliminate some more stress and do another $10. And then in 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, I do another $10. And it still hasn't rained. How much money did I just spend and how much return on investment am I going to get? And that's why I've moved my research to make it simple, cut and dried, and inexpensive, is just basically get the ROI, generate the data, prove to the industry why you want to work with these types of technology. And that's when I first ran into Josh, and John was me a couple of years, 3 years ago when I saw the first presentation. And it was all about getting a hold of them and working with them to develop the ROI, to develop their R&D work so that there's a reason for somebody to look into a product and moving it forward. Hence the number of brew stations. You know, we've got to have the data to support the growth, but it's hard to create the data without the growth because it's a chicken and the egg. I can't get money for research. Again, any volunteers wanting to donate money for research, let me know. I'll spend it wisely and we'll create more data. The more data we create, the better. Had a quick discussion earlier with a fellow by the name of Kelly. I really like short weights and measures because I get clear-cut data, but I appreciate the argument as well that sometimes we want to do that half mile. So when you work with me as a cooperating grower, I'm always looking for those short weights and measures as much as I know we want to know what it does from here to Timbuktu. So the ACF, one of the things is a conceptual paradigm shift as a producer. Not so much for the industry. They're starting to move this way, slowly but surely. There's more and more of us that are like-minded. But the reason I have that slide up there, and I'm not going to ask you to guess why, but it's a human thing, okay? We look at what we see. We don't identify what we don't see. So as an agriculture producer or an input person or a manufacturer, it's all about what it looks like. But I don't get anything up top unless I look after the bottom. We hear the conversation of regenerative farming today. We're not regenerative farming the top. We're not working with that. We're regenerating the soil efficiencies so that we can create more growth on top. But until we change our approach to what we're doing to our soil, we'll never achieve what we can achieve full-heartedly and extensively to the point where you'll be ecstatic. Travis stood up here earlier. He's not the only one in my world of influence. He said he's not using fungicides. He's not. He's reduced his fertilizer inputs. Yes, he has, significantly. I question whether or not he's spending any less money, because I know when I was developing integrated pest management in the 80s, I didn't spend any less money. I just reallocated the funds. But I can tell him my ROI at the end of the season was going up. And what you'll find as you start to create this paradigm shift, instead of your income and ROIs doing this, you'll flatten that curve out and it'll start to climb. You won't necessarily change your expenses, but you'll move the needle upward where you're getting higher and better quality crops as you improve the system. Because where does it stop? We don't really know yet, guys. So how do I create this data? First thing I do is I start off with plot work. You saw a list of materials that I've been testing. I put it into plot work. Then I take it to a bunch of cooperating growers and I start to do some field structure work. And I measure my lines. It's 500 to 700 feet long. I start to get a database and then the thing rocks out. And that's why Josh has got the kind of growth that he's got. These are the sort of things that are real numbers. They're from research. You look at these and you go, yeah, whatever. Whatever. It's reality. I didn't make these numbers, man. This is done third party. All my work is done at third party research facilities across Western Canada, the northern US. So with that thought in mind, I'll give you this little whatever. Where does disease come from, guys? Soil. I heard the word dirt. See, guys, I'm not the only one that says a dirt digger. Oops. So I'm going to give you a little story here because I think Josh's product is going to have a serious influence on this, because when you get to the end of this presentation, you're going to see some slides here. But I took the Chitotrol product at the bequest of Advanced Ag and the guys in the States to do a Fusarium head blight control treatment in Fargo, North Dakota. Can't do that quite here in Canada because we're almost getting there. 20 minutes. Okay, so what this scientist down there did is we took corn seed that is a super host for Fusarium graminearia, which is your head blight. I inoculated the corn seed, got all the plats done, used durum, which is probably the most susceptible cereal crop to head blight. Sprinkled that corn seed all across those plots. I turned the heads pink. He was just so enthralled with the disease level, he was just ecstatic. Now I'm thinking, what product in the world is going to control that? Well, guess what? We put it on and we cleaned it right up. Gone. So my question is, and I'm always rubbing, that's why I'm asking for donations of research money, because I would love to be able to get a soil test done on those plots underneath that application to identify the level of Fusarium control I now have at the soil level. Will I have controlled that Fusarium to the point where next year I don't have an issue? That's where this is all going, guys. That's the regenerative process. If I eliminate the dirt in the soil, like these plots, for instance, if I did 2 gallons this year, the first year in 18, I did 2 gallons the next year with a rotational crop in the exact same flag spot. The young lads that did that work for me are here. Now, next year, it's going to be in the exact same spot at the exact same rate with a third crop rotation. Now I've got 3 years of the same application in the exact same spot. So what are the soil changes I've made there? As you listen to John speak, he would say, I've generated these functions. So if part of those functions is to have the spin-off effect for the soil to be able to mediate and remediate itself, what's the level of Fusarium I've got left there? What's the level of sclerotinia? What impact does it have on Phaneomyces? All these issues that we have generated the problem, boys and girls. We've got to find a way of getting back from underneath that. But maybe this may be the path. And there's to be some more photographs that identify that. What's it like if I put it on peas? Is it worthwhile doing trial work, getting it onto the farm, getting it into the system, figuring out where to work? I get questions all the time when I do these types of presentations. Where's it work best? We're working on it. Believe me, we know what it works really well on now on our cereal crops and our pulse crops. How many more crops are out there? We know a great kits butt on potatoes. We're seeing some great data there, but there's a lot more crops to test. And we need to do the work going forward. So we won't always have an answer to every question, but we're spending boatloads of money getting there, and we're showing some significant changes in the whole works. Like there's another one. These are research numbers. These are done by third-party people. These aren't generated by myself in particular or Josh, even though I'm on contract for R&D and could easily do the work myself. But as I represent the numbers, you got to know that I didn't generate these numbers. These numbers are being generated by third-party people. So there's no bias here. None whatsoever. I didn't make the numbers up. Somebody else has done the work to create those numbers. So here's a field study group. So like I mentioned earlier, I take products like this ACF, like Josh has tasked me to do, and I take it to farmers. I take it to producers, right? Cooperators, I call them. And I do a line. And in my world, my line's no longer than 700 feet. So when I get out there to test that line, I want to walk that line. I want to see where it's thin, thick, and I want to even that out. So I'm doing a measurement that's adequate. So I'm not going to push the numbers and fray the numbers, because bad numbers make bad decisions. So if you're going out there to do things, and I know I appreciate the guys that do the half miles, because they've done it for years in the same field, and they know what's going on in that field, so they can do it. But for me, as a stranger going to a farm, to a flag, I got to walk that spot before I lay down the start and finish. I don't want to create numbers that don't work, because that's a real number. Almost 10 bushels. Look at the ROI we're looking at. That's seriously good ROI on a strip in the field. That one was around just short of 700 feet. Now, here's an interesting thing here. It's going to be hard to see, but the treated is on the left-hand side. There's my flag. I've been to that spot in that field testing different products for a number of years. I get to the flag. I'm just bummed, because the farmer did the trial for me. He says, Scotty, you recognize where the flag is. It's been there before. I'm quite disheartened, because it just so happens that that very section, it's moderately saline. So that means if I measure that, the left side's going to be in the saline pocket, the right side's moving out of it. And I'm frustrated. I'm walking around. He giggles at me. He says, well, don't worry, Scott, the real flag we're measuring is at the other end. So I go on down the other end of the field. I mark out my stuff. We get the weights and measures. We got about 5 bushels on that line, still significant. And I'm sitting there in the combine with him thinking, let's go back there and measure that line. I said, I'm going to move the combine on the control out of the saline pocket, and I'm going to leave the combine on that line in the saline pocket. And I walked it, and I went about 700 feet before I got to the point where I considered about 2/3 of that treated area was in moderately saline ground. So in theory, I should have a yield drag. So as I zoom in on, did I get the other one? No zoom in. So as I go out there and I do the testing, this is what I come up with. I ended up getting the same yield through the moderately saline area as I did in the non-saline area. For me, the way I do my work, I know that's a reality, because I can see the growth, as you can see it all season long, that it was growing much better in the saline pocket. Not huge differences, but at least I got something there. And I had a chap ask me earlier about what I thought about doing the humic acids and using the ACF. And I think it's also going to take a little bit in certain areas. It's going to take a little bit of calcium sulfate or lime. I sincerely believe, depending on the artesian movement of water in our fields, we can start pushing back against these saline areas. Another 4 or 5 years, and I think I'll have put together more and more answers to that very question. I don't think I'll be as rich and famous as I think I should be, because the guy who discovers that should be the wealthiest guy in the man. I don't think I can't go a day or a week without somebody saying, Scotty, you got something to fix my saline soils? I really could use a little help there. I only have about 500 acres on my farm. I don't want to grow 600. So we got to get rid of this issue, guys. So there's that. Peas, you can see with the numbers there. Unfortunately, the area where I measured the first time off had a boatload of manure. That's severe manure, and that was several years beforehand. So the peas where I did my measurement, they went flat as pancake. At the other end, the other section where the flag was, he wiped it out before I got there, but we did some yield mapping, which I don't always have faith in it, but it was 12, 15 bushels. So if I'm that far ahead on a yield mapping system, I know it's significant enough. I'll put it into a slide and say, okay, I'll live with that. But I have to be honest with you, I didn't weigh that line at the other end. That was from his yield map systems. Yeah. Well, it was several years beforehand, and he felt really silly because we'd had that discussion, because he called me the second year after. He applied, if you read that, he applied it twice in a period of 3 years. He figured by now, because he grows a boatload of crop, that it'd be mellow enough and he wouldn't have any problem. And of course, when the peas get 8 feet, there's going to be a problem. Like, he had to walk into peas like this. It was hilarious. No, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that because he didn't have a good yield. I think actually it was pretty good yield in field, actually, even though it fell over. But there was just, he figured it would be mellow enough, right? And he doesn't have a full-time agronomist. He's just one of my cooperators that always does all kinds of trials for me. He also did that. He also did that other wheat field way back here. He did the wheat trial for me as well. Because, doing this kind of work, my hat goes off to you guys that are willing to be cooperators, because it's a lot of work doing this kind of stuff in the field. And I it's hard to get, paid for that. I'm always looking for products that if you do a trial, you're going to make money doing it. And that's really how a producer that works with me gets compensated, is really by having an opportunity to make money. So here's another good photograph of how we're seeing a significant level of increase in nodulation. Travis talked about it. I could take picture and photograph after photograph after photograph. As John Wong was saying earlier in his presentation, there are synergies that occur by the function that you apply to the soil. And we have to get our minds away from, is it a bacteria? Is it a fungi? Is it a biostimulant? Is it a plant growth regulator? What is, I'm establishing functions in the soil to create responses. Because if I create the right function in the soil, I get these spin-off effects. And that's where the regenerative process kicks into high gear and you change your soil rapidly. I could come up with a couple of biostimulants that drive photosynthetics like no tomorrow, and the reparation work that goes on from the exudates is nothing but astounding. But it's a process. You're generating functions. You're rolling things in together. It's a paradigm shift. Oh my golly, the time is flying. Okie. That's why I got her up here, because I don't want to get yanked off the stage. Soybeans. It's part of the pulse industry. We're seeing some dramatic differences in lentils and in peas and in chickpeas and alfalfa and things. Once again, I'm trying to establish what crops it works on. I'll be the first one to tell you guys, until I get more work done, a couple other crops out there, I'm not going to advocate its use till I get the right data. So here's another thing here. Soybeans, this is the field Josh and I were in one day, if you remember, Josh. We don't have that photograph up there because I'm afraid to put it up there. We lay all these beans out. We count every seed in every pod. And I swear to God, guys, we're looking at double the seed production. And we're driving away going, woo-hoo, we got kick-ass here, boys. Yeah, I got 4 bushels. So is that a bad weight and measure? Maybe a little bit, but I can't grumble too loud, because my cohorts did it and told me it was 600 feet or so. So it was well walked and well mapped. So sometimes you can make things look gorgeous and the numbers don't always wash out that way, but that's worth pursuing, right? Well, more than worthwhile producing. Here's another good one on the soybeans, a little bit better average. But again, look at this functionality of that soil has generated more nodulation. And long-term effect, if I create all this exudate work from a plant that's larger, creating more photosynthesis because it's a bigger canopy, and I drive more photosynthesis, what's going to happen next year? Watch, here it comes. So, you might be able to tell that this is Hal's hands. He's got his hands in everything around here, I tell you. So anyway, I did a bunch of plot work on potatoes. And I'm going to take that plot work out to PEI this coming season, because they have serious issues of nematodes, pink rot, verticillium wilt. And so I'm going to try and get this product and take it to task. And I'm going to throw every disease at it. Because out on the PEI and New Brunswick, it's phenomenal, the chemistries they're using. But what a place to start. I'm working with a chap who does custom fumigating right now in Ontario as we introduce this. And I showed him these numbers. I mean, that's serious. That's 1 ton to 1.5 tons more potatoes an acre. The return on that investment is significant. It's worth pursuing. There's a chap in the crowd here. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes corner to corner next year on his potatoes. He's done the work. He's done the trials. He's done his due diligence. We've got some data come from replicated work now. We can move forward. It's exciting. Because what's going to happen to these potatoes in that field, in that moderately saline area next year? We could fold it over to the point where you might not even notice them. It's a bad area of the field. It's all critical at this point. Now, what's that line? That's actually where it's applied and not applied in a matter of weeks. So it comes back down to the functionality. And we've got a lot more research to do. I mean, we're at the University of Lethbridge. I could drop 150 grand into research there in a hot minute. Anybody got any donations? But look at that. So that's telling me not only is it a soil application response, but there's got to be some assimilation with the tissue that's creating nitrogen uptake. There's an assimilation there. If you go online and you start studying endophytes and go to Indigo Ag, they're all trying to find products where you can assimilate the cell structure to generate kind of this response. I think, guys, boys and girls, I think we're there. Because I can get that rapidly. It's phenomenal. And I'll tell you this and that and the other thing, that no matter where I went, you can read the numbers there as I chat, I'm running out of time, is whether it was in Alberta, whether it was in Saskatchewan, whether it was in Manitoba, or whether it was in Southern Ontario, when I went into hay production, grass production, turf, or golf courses, I'm a diehard golfer, within 10 days, the response is nothing but astounding. I used to say amazing, but it's beyond that, right? This is 4 weeks after application from an aerial photo. Can you imagine that these guys didn't buy one of those brew stations right afterwards? You know what an acre of sod is worth? A lot. I'd like everybody to guess, what's an acre of sod worth? How many acres you got there? 40 acres of trial. Woo-wee. Somebody's making money on that one. So where I get excited is this. This is after a PGA shotgun golf tournament at a golf course, 180 golfers. That's what it looked like after the golf tournament. Boys that I got the product to showed up the next day, just luck of the draw. And we've been golfing all weekend in another place. We're not in that league myself. I'm getting there. That was 10 days later. And that's the ACF-SR, no fertilizer. None. Now, if I can get that every time I apply it, am I selling you a snake oil? Please don't nod yes. Oh, God. I'd be so discouraged. But these are the sort of things that create an excitement in my world because I've seen them coming for a long time. And I've been testing a number of them. And this is one of the first companies that's willing to supercharge all that is involved and getting right behind it. And they're selling it right and they're developing it right. Because again, it all comes back down to the ROI. If you've got the data to support its use, you'll support its growth, and everybody that touches it has the opportunity to benefit from its use from one end of the spectrum to the other. Now, I don't want to get into what I'm seeing here, but this is the same golf course where that was applied. Same golf course, applied the same day, 10 days later. That was on what they call the golf green nursery. So they'll have about 3 acres of nursery grass where they can pull it up and plant it into golf green if it's damaged. That is a disease. And because I don't have a label, I'm not going to say what disease it is. But that's 10 days later. So there's a spectrum of many diseases out there where there are spin-off effects, where there are control measures going on. So if I can do that, I can create some serious benefits. And I know that that's what's coming down the road. Because like I said, I did some work on Fusarium head blight. There's going to be all kinds of other tests we're going to do later on as well on other disease controls. This is a pasture. This is thanks to Hal and his crew at ICI. This is an untreated piece of the pasture. There's the treated side. So that means this side treated, this side not. It's not down the road. There's side by each. Okay? Again, that's the control. That's the treated. Don't forget, I'm trying to develop documentation. I'm trying to build a portfolio of data. So I can't be up here falsifying my data or I'll have zero reputation. I'll have 0 more speaking engagements. And you know how I love doing this. So what does that mean, guys and boys and girls? Take a look at that soil sample. I couldn't believe the first one I saw. So I asked Hal, I said, Hal, we got to do this again. And look what we got. That is nothing short of remarkable. Now, I've taken this concept and these thoughts of turf and golf green stuff to folks that I know that are plant pathologists. Is that, you know, because we're moving into an area that's highly fungal dominant, because you think about the prairies, you've got your grasslands, your grass and shrub, then you have your bush. And as you move down that chain, you move into more and more fungal domination. Is the ACF bringing about the response and the functionality to bring the balance back? Perhaps that's possibly it. Because remember, these are permanent type cultures that we're dealing with. But how much phosphorus do we actually have in our soils that are not being identified? We've changed our growing practices. We've changed all kinds of cultural practices and equipment. And we're looking at our soil samples. I deal this all the time with when you look at an orthophos and a starter fertilizer, oh my God, you're robbing my phos. Well, your phosphorus isn't even available anymore. So what are you worried about? Look what we can do. This is in the midst of north of Tabor. It's right on your doorstep. That's 3 years it took to get that kind of solubilization of phos and potash and all the other elements. These are real numbers. And this brings me to this. I think I'm almost at the end. Yes, I am. Right, Ashley? How much more? I got 4 minutes? I'm at 40 minutes. Oh, 5 minutes in. Okay, so where was it going for that? Oh, yeah. So this takes me back to the paradigm shift of what you're doing in the soil. And this is what I'm going to close with, because you too can generate these responses and these opportunities. But I want to bring one more cultural practice into your realm to think about. And I know it's very dry out here, and I know there's issues with moisture, but think of this. These turf soils with these kind of soil remediation opportunities grow about 10 months a year. When you plant a crop of wheat, you're growing it maybe 3.5, 4 months. And what's the first thing you do when you see a volunteer cereal crop out there? It's toast. Oh my God, my neighbors will think I'm lazy if it stays green for another day. So I got to get rid of it. Soon as there's nothing alive on that above the ground, driving the exudates, the soil goes dormant. This took 3 years to do. If I only grow a crop 4 months of the year instead of having a cover crop in the fall that stays green as long as humanly possible, driving exudates the whole time, I'm trying to keep the soil alive, trying to keep the remediation process alive. If I can do that, I could probably cut the time clock down on a normal field production. But if you're going out there and you're putting a glyphosate on a volunteer cereal crop overnight, you're going to grow a crop for 4 months of the year. This response could take a decade or more. Do you want to wait a decade for this response? Keep burning out that volunteer crop and getting rid of the green in the fall. You'll slow the whole process down to a grinding halt. And that's just not what you normally do culturally. Oh my God, if it's not dead, burnt, and worked, I'm farming wrong. Remember Travis's alfalfa? There's years he hardly gets 2 inches of rain. Look at the size of that alfalfa. That's coming from water, soil use efficiencies. So as long as you're drawing that carbon dioxide in and throwing it into the ground through the exudates of a live plant, you're regenerating your crops. ACF-SR is going to be playing a major role in that because of the functions it brings into the soil environment. Thank you very much. Welcome.